My name is Bond.
James Bond.
James Bond.
Shit.
Right on,
A trio of murders in New York, New Orleans, and the Caribbean, and Secret Agent James Bond 007 is sent to investigate. James Bond's arrival in New York is anticipated, and he survives an attempt on his life. While the CIA investigates the diplomat Dr. Kananga, James Bond pursues the white pimpmobile into Harlem and to the Fillet of Soul. James Bond is intercepted where he meets the beautiful Solitaire, who serves Mr. Big with psychic abilities, and the notorious gangster Mr. Big. James Bond escapes the clutches of Mr. Big and is intercepted by the CIA. James Bond pursues the connection of Mr. Big and Dr. Kananga to the Caribbean island of San Monique, where he's met by his CIA contact, Rosie Carver. James Bond and Rosie, along with Quarrel Jr., investigate the island home of Dr. Kananga. James Bond exposes Rosie as working for Dr. Kananga, but Rosie is taken out. James Bond gets an aerial view of Kananga's home and meets up once again with the beautiful Solitaire. The cards tell Solitaire that James Bond is to be her lover, and the two join forces. James Bond and Solitaire escape, but are pursued by Kananga's forces. But Bond and Solitaire escape and arrive in New Orleans, where they are once again intercepted by Kananga's goons. James Bond manages to escape but loses Solitaire in the process. Bond and Felix Leiter investigate the Fillet of Soul in New Orleans, and Bond is intercepted once again, where he's interrogated by the gangster known as Mr. Big. But Mr. Big and Dr. Kananga are one and the same. Under interrogation, Kananga learns that Solitaire has lost her psychic powers. James Bond manages to escape death by crocodile, sets fire to Kananga's drug labs, and escapes through the Louisiana Bayou, much to the chagrin of Sheriff J.W. Pepper. Bond returns to San Monique, where the beautiful Solitaire is meant to be sacrificed. James Bond takes out the evil Baron Samedi, rescues Solitaire, and infiltrates Kananga's underground lair. Bond takes out Kananga's goons, and then it's mano a mano. Bond takes out Kananga, and James Bond and Solitaire travel by train into the sunset. But there's still one goon left to dispatch, and James Bond and Solitaire are finally in the clear. Or are they? Written by Tom Mankiewicz and directed by Guy Hamilton, 1973's Live and Let Die.
The second in the McKenswick trilogy.
That's right. Yeah, the second of the big trilogy. And I'm going to start off right now by saying I can't believe we are already talking about the Roger Moore films.
Yeah.
I feel like we just breezed right through the last 7 films. I cannot believe we are talking about the 8th film already.
Really? I know. It's crazy. And Roger Moore, I think one of the nicest guys to ever play James Bond. From all the things I've ever heard. I've never heard a bad thing about the guy, you know?
Not at all. Not a one.
You know, he seemed like I never met him or anything like that, but I would have loved to. You know, he seemed like a great guy. And he was doing actually the series The Persuaders with Tony Curtis. And he was kind of in a contract for that. But the problem with that, the show is doing good in Great Britain, but it just didn't hit in America. So he was let out of his contract, and they decided to cancel the show, and he was available to be James Bond.
Yes. Yeah, and it's interesting. He is, well, first of all, he's the Bond that I was sort of raised on, or grew up on. Because again, I mean, I got into Bond in the mid 80s when I was a early teenager. I think I would have been 11 when For Your Eyes Only came out. I believe it was the first one I ever set eyes on. Pun not intended. Then Octopussy was the first one I ever saw in the Octopussy was the first one I saw in the theater. I was 13. So yeah, he was the one that I knew. And seriously, when everybody else would say, like my father would be like, "Oh, you got to watch the ones with Sean Connery," I'd be like, "Who?"
Yeah.
And the Connery ones took me a while to sort of,
get your head around. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Because primarily I was sort of used to my, gentleman secret agent being a super nice guy. And then you see Connery's kind of mean and gruff, and you're like, wait a second. So yeah, and Roger Moore, I got two things I always say about Roger Moore. Because I feel like nowadays when everybody kind of is demanding the gritty, realistic spy thrillers again, which I certainly concur with, Roger Moore, one, I believe he carried us through a period where, again, I don't know if audiences really were into that anymore. The hard-boiled stuff like From Russia with Love, it was getting passé. So Roger sort of carries us through this kind of weird era. And I think he's one of the reasons why we have James Bond today, frankly. I think without Roger, I don't know what we would have done.
I think that also plays into the longevity of the series, the way they kind of switch it up and then they get different tones, And I think they kind of found the right tone eventually for Roger Moore. And I think it played off his strengths brilliantly. And I have to say, you were talking about the first James Bond you saw. This was the first James Bond movie I saw. I was 5 years old. My parents decided to go to a drive-in. The idea being that, he'll just fall asleep in the back and, we can just go out and have a night at the movies and not worry about paying a babysitter and all that stuff. Well, I stayed up for the whole thing. And it started my James Bond mania fandom.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so Live and Let Die. Let's get into the nitty gritty. It's an interesting one for sure.
You know what? I was reading one of the great James Bond books I have about the films. I believe it was what was I reading? Oh, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That's the one I was reading, and they start talking about the similarities from this and Dr. No, and I said, oh, you know what? They're right, but the thing is, it's presented in such a kind of a different way here that it seems fresh, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I've always sort of made the same observation. I think that it is very, part of it by accident, part of it is organic because, again, the book, again, takes place in Jamaica. In the novel, it is the same Quarrel that we see in Dr. No.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
So here we kind of find a way to sort of pull Quarrel back into it, but not really. Yeah. So it's very clever. So yeah, the setting is very interesting. So yeah, I find it to be very reminiscent of Dr. No, and like you said, it sort of has like a different packaging.
It does.
They it's like you said, it's sort of a fresh, modern take on that story. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it is very similar to Dr. No in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it starts off with the killing of a prominent British government official and or officials in this case, and which is the same thing as Dr. No, and there's no real Bond in the teaser. Well, I guess Dr. No is not really a teaser, but it has a lot of similarities.
Yeah, and interestingly, you mentioned the teaser, and I will say this: the pre-title sequence. It's frustrating because I love the scene in New Orleans.
Oh, that's great! Yeah,
the funeral scene is great. I mean, that is a lot of fun, and that is kind of, I've always been like the theme of death, and this is probably stating the very obvious. But the theme of death has always been kind of a factor in the Bond films. But specifically death, like things like funerals, like even Diamonds Are Forever had the funeral home.
Yeah.
Funeral parlors are mentioned in other films. They show coffins in other scenes. I kind of find the parallel sort of interesting. So when they did that funeral thing in New Orleans, I thought that's kind of vintage James Bond.
I find the parallels amusing.
I find the parallel amusing.
The frustration with that, though, is that there's no James Bond. And once it cuts to the credits, you kind of go, I kind of find the whole thing very painfully lackluster. Like, I wish they did a full-blown pre-title sequence in this film and then started out with the death of the British officials, like you said.
I think they did, in one of the script versions, they did have a Bond doing some business, and there was like a little bit of an action sequence. I don't know the particulars of it, but they did originally write that, but I think it eventually was cut out due to budget,
Because honestly, one of the things I also feel about this film, too, there's a lot of really good parts, but not a lot of really memorable action scenes. There's a lot of great chases. I guess the boat chase is probably the big action scene of the film.
I love that. I was watching this, for our review here, and I was taken aback because those are real people doing, making jumps with real stunt guys making those jumps.
Yes,
and that's amazing because
yes.
I went to go see that recent Hobbs and Shaw. And it was an okay time at the movies, kind of a forgettable, kind of whatever. And they had these crazy, car action sequences. But I was just so numb to it because I was like, oh, it's all CGI. There's no real danger. And there's something to be said about having these real stunts and these real people doing them.
But other than the boat chase, I kind of feel like if you had to say what's the big action scene from this film, not a lot, not a really over the top action.
Yeah, I guess the boat scene is probably the standout. Otherwise, I think the action here is it's competent action. I think they're solid. There's nothing extraordinary really.
I mean, interesting set pieces, but nothing.
I think the action fares better here than in the next film, Man with the Golden Gun, which kind of has all the action's kind of played for laughs for the most part.
Yes, yeah. I agree with that.
This has a good mix of like the action with a bit of humor, whereas in Golden Gun it's just kind of like the action's all about a punchline.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, and I kind of feel like that's sort of a thing with the Mankiewicz trilogy in general. It's kind of very well. See, interesting. I'm going to make an observation about this film, and it's even more true in the next one. But I'm kind of talking out both sides of my mouth because as I was watching this film, it kind of hit me this time like, it really is sort of a low stakes story. Like the world is not coming to an end. No one is holding the world hostage. So it never really hits these kind of epic proportions. But on the other hand, I've sort of argued about other Bond films that I don't mind it when it's low stakes. If the personal stakes fill in the gaps.
Richard Maybaum complained about that too. Because when he saw the film and everything, and he said, the stakes aren't big enough, and that was his complaint.
Yeah, and I don't need everything to be the end of the world. Like again, we literally just talked about Diamonds Are Forever, and I think we both agreed. You didn't have to get crazy with the big satellites and the lasers and all that sort of stuff. You could have kind of kept it low key, and we would have been fine with it. Yet here I am, sort of complaining that the stakes are not high enough.
I'll say I think I disagree with you a little bit here. I kind of like that it's not huge stakes. Like huge, save the world stakes. I kind of like the more like a low key kind of, hey, we're investigating these deaths and let's see where the trail leads. I'm kind of okay with it. I think the movie's a lot of fun. It definitely is of the era. It's definitely. It was inspired by the Blaxploitation films of the time, but I like that. Yeah. It's kind of like I have the one Blaxploitation Bond, in the library of films, and it's really neat.
Yes,
and I actually have a thing.
That is true.
I'm a fan of Blaxploitation cinema, so this to me it's like chocolate and peanut butter. Let's mix them together. It's great. Yeah,
it is. What's interesting too is that this era, I kind of find. Like, you ever, like the early Woody Allen films?
Yes. The early funny ones.
Look, here's my point. If nothing lasts, why am I bothering to make films or do anything for that matter?
We enjoy your films, particularly the early funny ones.
But it's interesting because, like, a lot of his earlier films, like, he kind of starts doing different genres. Sleeper, obviously, like he does Love and Death.
Regarding love, what can you say? It's not the quantity of your sexual relations that count. It's the quality. On the other hand, if the quantity drops below once every 8 months, I would definitely look into it.
The Bond films are starting to fall into that same routine.
Yes.
Where it's kind of like Bond combined with another genre. And like you said, this one is Blaxploitation. Yeah. And they'll go on. The next one's a little more kung fu. Obviously, we get into science fiction later. So yeah, right. So you're kind of starting getting into like a weird era of Bond, and again, not saying bad, just different. Again, and we said before, we've kind of left the '60s, we've left the golden age of James Bond,
yes,
and now we're kind of getting into where they're exploring other things,
yes,
and again, it's interesting stuff.
I like it because it hits the ground running. I think that although the teaser sequence doesn't have, your traditional crazy wild stunt or anything like that, I like the way it segues into the Paul McCartney and Wings Live and Let Die song.
When you were young and your heart was an open book.
Yes.
And I think the best title song of the series. I love it. I think Guns N' Roses did a cover of it. That's pretty good. But nothing can beat this original Paul McCartney and Wings version.
Yeah. It is a fantastic.
And it's the first time that George Martin and Paul McCartney got together since the Abbey Road sessions. So that's kind of historic in itself.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, this title song is off the charts. I mean, it is one of the greatest. I mean, I think I probably have a couple like personal favorites that kind of, but yeah, I mean, I feel like empirically, it's easily at the top 5, if not 3, etc.
Yeah.
And I even like the titles from Richard Maybaum.
Yeah, it's a cool one.
Did I say yeah? I mean, he's really on point with this one.
And there's also, too, this is the first film in the series where, up at this point, where John Barry's not involved directly in some way. So George Martin takes the reins, and I love what he did. I think that George Martin had a fantastic score. Out of all the non-Barry soundtracks, that's probably this is probably the one I listen to the most, personally. Yeah. I love it.
I don't blame you. I mean, it is a good one, and it works. Again, it works so well with the film.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say this. I mean, this. It's funny, even when you watch it and some of the bad suits and stuff, but I do sort of watch this one and kind of go like, this reminds me of watching All in the Family when I was younger. Like, it just sort of has that.
Well, that's the thing some people don't get, I think, nowadays, is that, like, Archie Bunker, or in this case, Sheriff J.W. Pepper, they're idiots.
You're right.
Those two are supposed to be idiots, and we're supposed to be laughing at them. That's the intention. Yeah,
sure. And that was a very smart move on the choice of the filmmakers here. Because again, like I think that without that, you run into the risk of somebody complaining, oh, the black people are the bad guys. That's not a good representation. But they throw him in, who's just a total clown, So like he becomes the comedy relief now, So yeah, I mean, it's a smart move. And again, it's kind of a legendary character, really.
Yeah, I mean, I guess well received too at the time because they brought him back for the second one.
Yeah, which we'll get to,
or the next one in the series, I should say.
But yeah, he Clifton James is great in it. I mean, it's funny too. Like, he's another one. If you're not in the right mindset, it's like, oh, he's just total comedy relief, and he's silly and goofy. But you know what? But he's so good.
He is good at doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing is too is like when you watch that, you swear that he has to be just some hillbilly they found.
No, he's a very distinguished actor.
He was from New York City.
Yeah.
Like he's as far from a hillbilly as you can get.
Secret agent? On whose side?
I like the opening here too. We get to see a little bit of Bond's apartment, which is neat. Which is also happens in Dr. No, which is really neat.
Another throwback, interesting. It's funny when we're doing this series and we're rewatching the films. It's funny because again, a lot of these films, like I've seen them over and over and over, and I can almost recite them. So it's almost like, do I even need to rewatch it before? But I do, just to kind of brush up. But I find as we do it, I'm finding more and more like little details that I might not have noticed before. The scene when M goes to Bond's apartment, he walks in, and for some reason M is walking, he's making a beeline to Bond's bedroom. Like, the bedroom is very clear, and of course Bond is trying to play, he's covering up because he's got a girl in there, or he thinks he's got a girl in there, whatever.
Played by Madeline Smith.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I watch it now, and I'm kind of going, why is M so interested in Bond's bedroom? Like, he can see it's the bedroom. He can see that the bed has been slept in. Why are you going to go look at his messy bedroom?
Because maybe M is smarter than we think than Bond thinks he is.
That could be. That could very well be.
You know what's missing, curiously, from this movie is Q. And we didn't mention Q, I don't think, in Diamonds. So should we do Q times 2 again?
Bring it on.
We get quickly in Diamonds Are Forever. We get Q. He shows him. He's got that voice gadget thing, and he's got this thing that can when he's doing the slot machines, and he can what does he call it?
An electromagnetic RPM controller.
Yeah. But, what's interesting about I kind of wish we talked about it doing Diamonds Are Forever, because one of the things I noticed about that, speaking of the gadgets, is how cheap they look. It looks like somebody made them in metal shop. Yeah, between like the claw that bites the guy's hand in the pre-titles, and then the ring that Q is wearing. Right. So cheap looking. Very oddly cheap. Like I said, somebody made it in metal shop in high school.
Well, anyway, back to Live and Let Die. It's curious. His absence is curious, and I think bringing him in that scene with the apartment, that would have been kind of fun. It would have added to the humor, I think, of what's going on there. You have M come in, all of a sudden Q comes in, then Miss Moneypenny comes in. It'd be like, almost like everybody's. It would have added more and more to the farcical nature of what they were going for, which is it's fine how it is, but yeah.
It's interesting. I can't remember why Q is not in this one. But it's interesting that they make sure to mention him in the pre-titles. Like there's the watch bit, and then he says, Q says it does this at close range or whatever. Okay, I mean, so they're trying to keep him a presence in the film, but yeah, he's just not here for some reason.
And I like this month after that, after they do the exposition and blah blah blah, and then he's given his mission, and there's a really great montage there. Of him arriving in New York, and I love it. And they're sort of introducing Solitaire a little bit, and that is terrific. I think, and George Martin's score just adds to it. It's really great.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's the build up, and that's kind of sort of classic Bond. We're following him into the lion's den or whatever. I like that a lot as well.
And as a thing, he brings violence and destruction. Yes. Then they jump cut right to like the plane landing and the screeching. That's a perfect little. Yeah, kudos to the editor on that one. That's amazing.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, no, that's great stuff, and the supporting characters are all great, by the way.
Yeah, like we're introduced. I don't think we know his name yet, but Whisper does kills the guy in the car, and that's a neat little action sequence, I think.
Yeah,
they always have inventive ways. I was watching this today, and I was like, they always have little inventive ways of killing people here, and they like Henderson in You Only Live Twice. They have a curious way. The guy hits a dart, but there's like he doesn't go he just keeps driving like nothing's going on, and that's kind of a neat way to do it.
Yeah,
very cinematic. And we're not talking. Can't get too. Realistically,
it's got that sinister. It's got that sinister James Bond thing, where like Henderson getting stabbed in the back.
Right. Yeah.
Allison Anders in the next one. Maud Adams' character in the next one. So yeah, I mean it is very good, and it just again I like all of them.
7-Up is light and refreshing, crisp and clean, and no caffeine. Never had it, never will.
The guy, the 7-Up guy, is great. I forget his name.
Jeffrey Holder. He's the man. Yeah.
I mean, he's what a presence he has.
He steals every scene he comes into. He's great.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. Whisper's good. Even the guy with the claw, I kind of feel like maybe he's the least, interesting of all of them, but he's good.
You mean Julius Harris? You mean Teehee? I love Teehee. Teehee's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, seriously, it's funny because we just talked about Diamonds, and I remember walking through Diamonds feeling like a lot of supporting characters in that just felt very odd to me.
Yeah, no, that is a mixed bag, I will admit. Yeah.
The guy who played Shady Tree, I kind of felt like, again, like whose grandfather had nothing to do and they pulled him in,
Yeah. But maybe we could do a little bit of the unsung henchmen of Live and Let Die, and there's two of them that I'd like to bring up. The first one is Adam.
Bond ripped off one of our boats. He's headed for the Irish Bayou. The man that gets him stays alive. Now move, you mother!
Played by Tommy Lane. Now, Adam is the guy that chases Bond in the boat, and he's at the climax. He's the guy he throws gasoline on. But
yes.
And he also has that scene at the airport. It's like, you took something from that island, Bond, that didn't belong to you. That whole thing, really good, and kind of unsung.
Yes.
He goes toe to toe for a while with Bond on the boat, and then the other has got to be the cab driver.
Hey man, for $20, I'll take you to a Ku Klux Klan cookout.
He's played by Arnold Williams, and he's terrific as well.
The whole thing at the airport, by the way, is also, again, see, this is what I'm sort of saying, like all of the action scenes, they're kind of like these very mid-level action scenes. There's nothing kind of like blockbustery about any of them. And like I remember watching it when I was younger, it was almost like a kind of a frustration that the airplane never leaves the ground, because I'm thinking, well, that would be cool, like a chase flying airplanes, but I guess that's a whole other ball of wax to try to film that. So what they do is interesting, and it also, by the way, kind of goes back to the idea. I remember kind of like around this era, you're sort of asking yourself, like, does Bond know how to fly a plane? Because everything up until this point suggests that he can't.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We have to get to the big baddie.
Oh, Yaphet Kotto, the great.
He's great.
Yeah, oh, he's
really good. Yes. Talk about a role that has to be a lot of fun, like a coveted role for actors to be able to sort of like show their acting chops. Because he's essentially, he's sort of playing, I mean, the obvious answer is that he's playing two roles, but really it's kind of even richer than that. Because he gets to be, again, the gangster hoodlum Mr. Big. Then he's Kananga, who is a little more sophisticated. But he also sort of, I love when you get to the end action scene where Bond is squaring off against Kananga, and Kananga's got the knife. And it's this kind of, like, it's almost like he's playing an amalgam now of the sophisticated man, but who can fight like it's a very cat-like street level.
Yeah, I know.
Knife fighting. You know what I mean?
When he's there with that knife, he looks dangerous, man.
It
really does.
And you can see me sort of struggling to explain like what's exactly happening there.
It's like,
but again, it's almost like now he's
Charles Gray, man. This is some serious business, you know? Yeah.
There you go. Right. Exactly. Yeah. But it's almost like the two different characters have now merged.
I also,
and now Kananga is sort of a combination of both.
Oh yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, that's great. You know what? I'd also like to add to that sequence. I also think it does a good. Sort of, I wouldn't say like an arc, but for the character of Whisper, because as as Bond is escaping, he says, hey, he tries to alert Kananga, but that's like his, ironically, because of what his ailment there or whatever, he can't alert him soon enough, which is it was a great, great little end to that character,
Very true, yeah. Actually, and by the way, this is, I don't know how I'm going to make the leap from that to this, but I like how the Q gadgets play out in this.
Yeah,
because
I like that the one scene where obviously when he's with the crocodiles and then he's got that magnetic thing.
Exactly.
This is how he's going to get out, and then he kind of sit back in your seat and you're like, oh yeah, but then it's tied to the tree, and right. I was like, he's going to have to find another way out of here, and that's what they should do more often. But yeah, and that run across the crocodile thing is fantastic. Somebody actually did that.
Awesome.
It's not CGI. Yeah. They actually had crocodiles that they went over the tops of their heads. Amazing.
Yeah. That is again a vintage Bond moment too, because it's again using his own ingenuity to get out of a bad situation. Yeah. I mean, you can't beat that. That's just
and the trespassers will be eaten. It's great.
Yes, and I love the story behind that. By the way, like when they were down there filming, that they actually saw there was a real sign like that, so they were like, "Oh, we got to have this."
That's great.
In fact, the guy who was the alligator wrangler, his name was Kananga. That's
where
they get the name. Ross Kananga, I believe his name was, and he was the real full blown. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's the guy who does the stunt where he runs over the backs of the crocodiles.
That's amazing. One of the things that we should talk about is Jane Seymour as Solitaire.
Oh yeah,
probably one of the best Bond girls of all time. I mean, fantastic.
Yes, I would agree.
She's good with this. She's good as playing the high priestess, but she also has this vulnerability that she's able to project. But it all seems genuine from her.
Yes, and interestingly, it's almost like, remember we sort of argued or said how Tiffany Case kind of she goes from tough and able to being the damsel in distress and just sort of a ditz. Solitaire kind of goes through different things too, but it works much.
Oh yeah,
better.
It makes it makes sense.
Exactly. I mean, right. So she specifically has a moment in this film where she loses her special ability. Yes. And now she's totally on the defensive. Like her bargaining chip is gone. So you totally understand why now suddenly, like it's like the rug has been pulled out from underneath her. So I right. Her character is handled very well. Jane Seymour is spectacular in the role. I mean, she's obviously stunning. So yeah, I mean, she is absolutely one of the greats for sure. And and by the way, she must have made a deal with the devil because she still looks stunning.
Well, with those tarot cards, who knows? You got them in your house, get rid of them, and that's all. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But and we got Gloria Hendry as Rosie Carver.
Yeah, and she's great too. And again, she's interesting too. And I think I remember like early on. See, again, it's funny how I'll go through these weird periods, and this is one of those films. Live and Let Die is one of them that I seem to sway back and forth in my opinion of the film. Sometimes I'm a little harder on it. Sometimes I seem to be very forgiving, and I enjoy it much more. I think Rosie Carver is one of those characters where, way back when, I think I probably rolled my eyes and said, "Oh, of course she's got to be dumb and not very good just because it's funny, whatever." So I like her. She's great in the role, and yeah, she's fun. And by the way, I think one of the greatest lines in any James Bond movie.
You don't understand, see? They'll kill me if I do.
And I'll kill you if you don't.
But you couldn't. You wouldn't. Not after what we just done.
I certainly wouldn't have killed you before.
And by the way, I kind of feel like he's so underwritten that it almost flies under the radar. But I mentioned before, Quarrel Jr.
Yes.
I like that they were trying to sort of imply some continuity and bring this again. Quarrel gets killed in Dr. No. Obviously, this book came before Dr. No in the Fleming novels, so Quarrel was in the novel. So they tried to pull him back in, and they called him Quarrel Jr. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. I thought,
and he doesn't have much to do. This actor, as Quarrel, they don't give him much, but the few lines he has, he kind of nails it. He's really good.
I could have shot you.
You might have even killed me if you'd taken off the safety catch.
It was almost like they were sort of doing that. They used to do the Felix Leiter routine in the earlier Bond films. Like you just sort of see him creeping around in the background. You didn't know who he was.
And
then you found out later, that's Felix Leiter.
Mm-hmm.
Same idea here, right? Mm-hmm. You don't know who he is, and is he a bad guy? And then. So, pretty interesting
I had
stuff.
Actually, one of my favorite silly jokes in here about Felix Leiter is when they're in the car and he's on the cigarette lighter. He's like a genuine Felix Leiter, illuminating. It's such a stupid joke, but it gets me every time. It's so dumb.
Yeah.
Before we get on a thing here, I wanted to, because since this is sort of a Blaxploitation movie, just really quickly, I'd like to just share maybe like a little 30-second thing here. I'd like to share some 5 Blaxploitation films I think maybe you want to check out. There's Shaft, which also has Tommy Lane's in that for a little bit too. He's in that. Directed by Gordon Parks, and it really is a great film. It's got has got a score by Isaac Hayes, directed by Gordon Parks, and it has this great climax about them trying to save a kidnapped victim, but it's all done with sort of music and not a lot of dialogue. Terrific piece of cinema. And then, of course, there's Coffee with Pam Grier, which is a great movie, which you kind of start watching that and you're kind of like laughing at it. And by the end of the movie, you're really into the characters and what's going on. Great movie. Another one I want to talk about that's really great is Truck Turner, because it has Yaphet Kotto as the villain, and Isaac Hayes is the hero of the piece. He's like a bounty hunter, skip tracer kind of guy. And that's a great movie too. And this, I think, it was released the same year as Live and Let Die. But that actually has a really good hospital shootout sequence. And I have to go with Slaughter, Jim Brown. Another great movie. Rip Torn is the villain in that. Really great film. And the last one I'll leave you with is kind of a crazy one called Sugar Hill, which is sort of like has like elements like has here in Live and Let Die. There's zombies and there's voodoo, but it's actually really well done and it's a lot of fun. It's maybe you could say, you should have chosen Blackula, but I kind of like the Sugar Hill a little better. Although William Marshall is great in Blackula, but that's my little Blaxploitation corner there.
One of the things that I really, really like about this film is the settings. I think the locations here are really good.
Yeah.
Again, New York, Harlem, I think that's very smart. Just New York in general, and I kind of wish that the Bond films would someday kind of revisit New York again. New Orleans, awesome. And I tell you what, you know how I always say that if I ever hit the big lottery, that I would buy Palmyra and restore it?
Yes.
I think if I hit a big lottery, the second thing I would do is buy that building in New Orleans and put a fillet of sole right there, exactly how it looks.
That would be awesome.
New
we'll
Orleans
have the
is
table
great.
that goes down, and
of course, absolutely. and you'd have to have the booth. I'll throw the booth in that turns around, even though that was the other one.
Is in that booth in New York City? Are the French fries going to be like 25 cents still?
I was watching that the other day with Mary, and the two of us kind of went, "Look how much things cost back then."
Yeah,
and that right. And by the way, the Jamaica setting, and of course they call it San Monique in this one, but it's all Jamaica, and it's so great. I mean, the location there is great. So I mean, like, I kind of really think it's a nice little trifecta of locations in this film.
You were talking San Monique. I was thinking about, what I really like in this scene, in this movie, is that bus thing. That's a good scene too, with that double decker bus.
Yes,
that's really cool.
Yes.
That's And Jane Seymour was like in the bus when that happened. That's crazy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like, why would you even need anybody? Just put a dummy in there, much less the actual actress.
Yeah, I guess they didn't know at the time what shots they were going to use, but they ended up using a shot where it didn't matter if she was in there or not. But
she has said, I've seen her in interviews, and she said between like those scenes, the scenes with the snakes when they got the snakes coming up to bite her or whatever, like there were some parts where they're she's like, I can't believe they actually made me do that.
Yeah, I mean, she seems genuinely frightened with in that snake sequence for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, I would be too.
So how do you like the connection, the romance between Bond and Solitaire?
I mean, it's kind of rotten what he does, isn't it? Really rotten.
It is, and it's interesting.
Then you could say, we could argue, well, the cards, they were leading up to the regular cards that she was using, kept saying the lovers, so,
Right.
Obviously, Bond wasn't taking any chances, but.
Yeah, it's funny too. And I've heard like Jane Seymour in interviews talk about that too, saying like years later she kind of looked back and went, "What a skunk he was."
Well, she's really into it though. Yeah, she's like, is there time for lesson number 3? Yeah, yeah.
There you go. Lessons learned. Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting, and again, I think it also falls into that category that we've talked about before, where it's the romance, the dynamic between Bond and his leading lady. It's kind of a balance between like genuine romance and Bond. She's a means to an end.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, James Bond is not an angel. He's a bit of a scoundrel.
Big time. I almost feel like it's the fact that like it would be one thing if it was just him kind of doing something sneaky to get her to let her guard down. But she's an actual virgin in this film. Like, I mean, they make it very clear that he is literally stealing her virginity, and I kind of feel like that takes it up a notch. So yeah, it's a little, it's borderline uncomfortable. I mean, it's not.
What's weird about it? I was watching it this time, and she says something about, I am married to the prince not of this world, and I'm like, okay, that's the devil. That's a little spooky.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's a wee bit creepy.
Yeah, because it kind of always washed over me, but this time watching it, I was like, oh, ooh, that's let's move on.
What's interesting too is that it's interesting how there are moments where you start to question as the viewer, like, is the film telling me that all this kind of voodoo stuff is sort of a hoax, or is it actually telling me that there is like an actual supernatural element?
I think there definitely is. I mean, you look at the end of the film with him on the train, which is kind of a perfect little tag scene with Baron Samedi on the train.
Yeah,
it's kind of creepy and a little chilly, but it kind of seems right for this movie. Yeah,
I agree with that. Yes, it does, and like you said, I mean, we think we saw him dying before. In fact, we actually thought we saw him dying because it's interesting the way they do it, where he gets he gets shot and his whole head blows
Oh yeah,
off.
that's like that fake one. That's a great little effect they did with his eyes, and it's
really
terrific.
Is. Yeah, the eyes roll back,
and then like
look
5
up.
minutes later, you have Kananga blowing up, and that looks terrible. It's like, whoa, what happened, man? I mean, that head was amazing.
Seriously,
what happened with the?
Oh my
I
God.
guess that beyond their means in the analog world, I guess back then,
Yeah,
right,
that big giant Kananga balloon. Oh boy, is that?
Yeah.
Yikes.
They kind of zoomed in on it and jump cut it real quick, just to give you just enough, to see. But it's like, whoa, what did I just see? Yeah.
Right. And actually, and it kind of goes back to what I said before about how, again, compared to a lot of the big, like if you compare the ending where Bond, he finds his way down into this underground area and there's Kananga and they square off and there's a fight and he's dead, the end. you pair that against something like You Only Live Twice. I mean, it's shockingly, I mean, when you sort of look at it in that perspective, it is shockingly, what's the word I'm looking for? Not
anticlimactic, maybe, or unspectacular. Yeah.
Thank you. Very anticlimactic in that respect. And again, it's not like, again, like I said, low stakes films are fine. Low stakes stories are great. But I like after when you watch the movie a couple times, you sort of go, oh yeah, that is pretty tame compared to some of the big over the top climaxes that some of the films have.
I mean, if you look at the budget, I mean, this budget is it's like considerably lower than the You Only Live Twice budget, which was like, you know, a lot in its day for sure.
And it's many years later.
I think, and they changed aspect ratios for these. You know, because starting with Thunderball, they went into the widescreen, and then they kind of went back here to the more of the flat aspect ratio. So yeah, I mean, there were, and I think that was done just simply to cut costs. You know, we have less space to fill on the screen, so you know we have.
I did know. It's funny when I watched the film, I kind of went, oh yeah, like why did they go back to that ratio? Because I mean, you would have thought at this point, just any Bond film is enough of a draw, a blockbuster to warrant the widescreen.
I think it's a cost-cutting measure. You know, it's just like, you know, because I think you know with Broccoli and Saltzman, there had always been arguments about the costs and all this stuff, and things would get better later. When Saltzman finally departed after Man with the Golden Gun, Broccoli had a little more control, and he can sort of do whatever he wanted. So I'm going to give this movie an 8. I think it's a great introduction to Roger Moore as James Bond. It's got a lot of flavoring, and the locales are good. There's some good, there's a couple even actual great action scenes, but most of them are pretty good. I really like the cast. Yaphet Kotto, I love the Bond girl Solitaire, played by Jane Seymour. Even Madeline Smith in a small role at the beginning is a great Bond girl. And it just has, it kind of moves, and it's got a great score by George Martin and a terrific title song. I really like Yaphet Kotto as the main villain. I love Julius Harris as Tee-Hee. And the rest of the henchmen. Yeah, it's a solid film, and I give it an 8.
Again, you know, my scores are always going to come off as harsh, I think, but I mean, you know, 5 is sort of like my mid-level. You know, again, it's just the upper half and the lower half of the Bond films is right around 5. I'm going to give this one a 6, and again, it's not meant to be harsh, but it is kind of like, again, I just find it to be sort of almost right at my lukewarm spot, where, you know, it's just above average, and you know, again, it's a solid film. I enjoy it. I don't run to it to watch it all the time. I love a lot of things about it. Great Bond girl, great villain, great location. But again, the stakes always felt kind of middling. And again, I do find a good solid argument for lower stakes films. From Russia with Love doesn't have big stakes. Casino Royale doesn't have big stakes. But I find that the personal stakes is sort of what makes it work. Here, again, nobody's really that excited to make sure we, you know, the personal level always feels kind of lukewarm. Even like Solitaire, again, like I love her character, but again, just watching her walk into the bus and sit down and just sort of relax. That's almost like a good way to sort of visualize how the film feels, where everybody's just there to kind of to do their thing and make a good solid film, but nobody's like swinging for the bleachers. So again, it's a better than average film. I'll give it a 6.
I hate to do this, but maybe David Henderson as Felix Leiter. That's the only thing. He's okay. He's better than the past Felix Leiters that we've had in the past couple of films. But still, it's not right. It's not a right Felix Leiter, you know? And maybe, and I don't think David Henderson's a bad actor by any means. I think he's a rather good one. But maybe it's the way they write Felix Leiter in these things. There's just something about it. It's just like he doesn't have, I guess, you know, I'm always going to be like that Jack Lord cool that I want, that I'm not getting, you know?
Not a lot of things about the film that I don't like, but, and again, this is almost sort of a cheap shot because I think everybody sort of looks at it and goes, "Oh yeah, that was a miss." The Yaphet Kotto balloon at the end. I every time I look at that, I'm kind of like, "Wow, like what were you guys thinking with that?" It's almost it's kind of cringeworthy that little that effect there.
I'm going to steal the boat chase. I love that boat chase. It's got some really cool stuff in it. Maybe it's a little long, and the Sheriff J.W. Pepper stuff maybe goes on a little too long. But there's some great stunt work in that, and some of it's a must-see. You got to remember, folks, especially you millennials out there, this is real. I mean, it's like they're actually jumping across roadways from one side of the lake to the other. It's amazing.
Again, a lot of really great things to choose from. Great villain, great Bond girl, a lot of, but I have a soft spot for the locations. I think again, New York is great, New Orleans is great, and Jamaica's great. I almost sort of wish they just called it Jamaica instead of kind of doing the whole fictional San Monique thing. It's only once in a while they'll do that with a Bond film, where they come up with like a fictional location. Again, you don't want to, I guess, hurt people's feelings if you're sort of implying that the leaders of these countries are corrupt, so you have to, I don't know, I guess so. But anyway, it looks great. All the New Orleans stuff is awesome, and it's fun to go, find these locations. So I'll go with that. So I guess that's Live and Let Die, and like I said, I can't believe we're already at the 8th Bond film. This is going fast. Anyway, so with that, this is the countdown to Bond 25. James Bond reviews will return.
When I was watching it this time, I thought Sheriff J.W. Pepper was amazing. I thought it was the best part of the film, and